Hello and welcome to the Dads of Football YouTube channel. I'm Jeremy. That's Josh. We are the Dads of Football, bringing you episode number 2 in terms of the combine preview. We've got DBs, safeties, tight ends. Those are the ones that we're talking about. In a quick hit for you, Josh, give it to me straight, man. Who are you feeling at the defensive back position?
So I'm going to start with the corner, and I think you and I have talked about this briefly, but the kid out of Toledo, Quinion Mitchell, just to me, right? You start looking at guys who you want that are hyper athletic. I think you get that out of him without any question. He's 6 foot, 195 pounds. The one thing I think sometimes this goes understated, but good wingspan at 75 inches plus. Long arms. Like I love that. And his 40 is a 4.35. So you've got a guy that can cover all positions. He's got a pretty good size frame, good body. Had a really nice career in the MAC, starting with his sophomore year, his senior year. He was fantastic. 39 tackles, 6 assists, 12 stops. I mean, I love it, right? And then his impressive QB rating when targeted was 49. I mean, you've got a guy that can just, and I understand he's playing against the MAC. He's not seeing the SEC receivers. I understand that. However, there's just something about him that smacks of maybe Devin Witherspoon from Illinois, right? Or Martin Emerson, the guy from Mississippi State over the last couple of years. So there's just something about a guy out of Toledo with that kind of ability who has been fantastic for 3 years because you can't get back snaps. You can't get back play. And for me, that's a guy I'm excited about. At the very least, to see what they do with him and what happens with him moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, he interests me when you look at, yes, 3 years of productivity from a guy. So you have to like that.
Yeah.
His senior year, may not necessarily his best year, 41 total
Sure.
tackles and 1 interception. I mean, when you're a cornerback, the interceptions can come and go. It's not the biggest thing in the world. Are you afraid at all that
Right.
he might be one of those guys that puts up good numbers in the combine and doesn't necessarily produce as much on the field?
I think certainly that could be the case, right? He had 14 pass breakups. You toss that out there, and I don't think that's something that you can necessarily skip. But I think you also toss in the fact that 3 years of playing, teams aren't throwing to his side, and if they're going to attack him, it's going to be with the team's best receiver. That excites me, right? I mean, I think one of the things that I've read about him talks about the idea of his field vision, particularly in zone coverage. And I think when you have a guy that can play man, a guy that can play in the zone, with just incredible natural instincts for the ball, it's hard not to get excited. So certainly maybe, you look at his senior year and go, okay, fine, wasn't quite as productive, but people aren't throwing him. They certainly aren't attacking him. So that part of it is exciting.
Here's what I think is interesting about cornerbacks. Now, just like receivers, you have more corners, you have more guys at that position. So you're
Yep.
going to have more, you're going to have a deeper talent pool. But I think it's really interesting when looking at the cornerbacks. I mean, you look at how many guys that the NFL combine makers have it put together. They have a ton of guys that are rated 6.0 or higher,
Yep.
which is pretty high for this group. And I mean, you could look depth wise. I mean, you could get really like 14 guys, maybe 13 or 14 guys
Yep.
that are probably going to go top 3, top 4 rounds. And it's deep when you have a guy like Cam Hart and Kalen King coming down at the bottom. I mean, I
Yes.
think that's pretty interesting. Now, Kalen King's a dude that interests me. He did not have a great season last year, 29 tackles, 0 interceptions.
Yeah.
But if you go back to his previous year, he probably would have been a first-round pick.
Yep.
So you have a guy that's probably dropped off a considerable amount because now you've got the Terrion Arnolds, Nate Wiggins, as you mentioned,
Yep.
Mitchell Kool-Aid, right now rated as like the 4th best corner, and he's probably going to be going maybe even before a bunch of those guys. And I haven't
Yep.
even mentioned my heart here, Cooper DeJean, who I think is the 2nd best cornerback in the entire deal, but who's also projected to go in the 1st round. So, I mean, we could
Yes.
see 4 or 5 corners go in the 1st round and probably put in good numbers. One thing I'll say about Cooper, you're not going to see him at the combine. He's still healing from his broken leg. He's healed, but it's not 100%. So it's
Yeah.
unfortunate we won't get to see what he can do.
Yeah, my thing with Cooper DeJean is coming back from that broken leg, being 6'1", right? 207 pounds. Is he still carrying 207? How is he going to get that weight back down? Can he still run that 4.5? Because I do think ultimately that is something that he's going to have to, at the very least, prove, once he gets in the league. His ability to
Well,
cover in zone is fantastic, right?
yeah.
Without question. I don't think that's even debatable with him, but um, for me, and one of the names that I've left out that I've always felt pretty strongly about is Terrion Arnold, also from
Mhm.
Alabama, right? You've got a guy who's
He's
6
the
foot.
number one. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I mean, so obviously he's fantastic, but is Cooper DeJean that level? I mean, that's what I wonder. And what's the gap between 1 and 2, and then in turn, what's the gap between 2 and 3? So
Yeah, I mean, they're very different type players. And here's the thing, and I think this will be
absolutely,
a good segue for us. Cooper DeJean originally, when he was at Iowa, they didn't necessarily look at him as a corner. He kind of just was there because there was a void. He was a guy that they thought was going to be a safety and has
yeah,
experience playing safety. He's a big dude for a corner. He's very wide, very athletic, tough, hard hitter. He could play a nickel position for you, but if you don't like him as a starting corner, throw him. You could throw him at probably strong safety. I mean, strong safety would be his
yeah,
position. And I could see a team saying, you know what? Let's take this guy and maybe let's, if we have a little bit of depth at corner, let's put him at the strong safety position. I
yeah,
think he could actually be a better strong safety in the NFL than a corner. Plus, he's athletic for days. He plays on
yeah,
special teams. And as we talked about, there really isn't a ton of depth outside of Tyler Nubin from Minnesota and Cameron Kinchins out of
right.
Miami. Other than those two, there's a handful of guys there, but not guys that are anywhere near the first round.
But there are guys that are interesting, right? You get a guy I like Jaden Hicks, right? Who is big boy, big frame out of Washington State. I can't remember if we've talked about him before, but I mean,
Mm-mm.
you're talking about a guy who runs a 4.59, who's going to be a strong safety. He's going to be a box guy. He's just about 6'4", 212 pounds. Um, I, to your point, maybe not a lot of depth, but some guys that are exciting, right? Especially a guy like Hicks who played at Bishop Gorman High School. He was fantastic all year last year, 64 tackles, 17 assists. Um, Kind of excited to see some of those guys, right? You got the top guys, and then you've got a guy like Hicks, right? Who
Mm-hmm.
also logged 7 total pressures and 3 sacks on the year. Um,
Mm-hmm.
those are guys to me you get excited about in the draft, at the combine. What are they going to do? So yeah,
Last position group to talk about that's going to be going on day 2. You've got the tight ends. There's the consensus number one, which is Brock Bowers. I mean, everyone's talking about him. He's the number
yeah,
one. He's going to be the first tight end off the board. Jatavian Sanders, number 2. It's those two guys, and then kind of everybody else.
yeah,
Um, Looking at that group of tight ends, it's kind of an interesting group. I haven't decided if they're underrated or if they're kind of mid. I'm kind of
yeah,
debating in my mind where I'm going to place this group because they do have talent. I go down to me on my list. I have a top 10 here. My number 10 is Brevin Spanford from Minnesota, who's a
yeah.
ginormous tight end. I mean, you could
Big
basically
guy.
put him at tackle and he could play it for you, but he can run a little bit. He had 500 yards receiving last year, only had
Yeah,
239 and 2 touchdowns this year. But he's a guy that intrigues me in terms of not necessarily being like a great tight end, but if he's
yeah,
the guy that I have at number 10, 1 through 10 maybe has some surprising depth there.
yeah. My number 9 is Trey Knox out of South
Mhm.
Carolina. Again, you talk about a guy who's 6'3", 239 pounds. Again, and you go back to it, but like an incredible arm span of almost 80 inches. One arm length. To me, that is exciting. You got big hands out of the kid. And then he runs a 4.48 40. I mean, you're
Mhm.
talking about a big body, big target, possibly underrated. He transferred to South Carolina for his 5th year. And had 37 catches for 312 yards. Maybe that doesn't pop off the page, right? 2 touchdowns
Mhm.
doesn't pop off the page, but it wouldn't be the first time when you have a guy who's a great athlete who had done some great things, but went to Arkansas, then goes to South Carolina for his 5th year. And maybe he comes to the combine and shows something, and then he gets drafted a little bit late, maybe. I'm excited to see a kid like that do some work beyond those top 3, 4, 5, which tend to be a consensus.
Well, and my number 3 is a guy that I don't think maybe will be 1,000-yard receiving tight end, which we don't really have any of those anyway right now. I mean, I don't even think we had 1,000-yard receiver as a tight end this entire season in the NFL.
Sam Laporta.
He didn't make 1,000. He got into the 900s, but he didn't make it 1,000. No. So I don't think we got 1,000-yard receiver. So that's a hard mark to hit. But if you can get anywhere between 600 and 800, you're doing your job. And that's where I like Cade Stover out of Ohio State University. He's actually bigger than I thought he was. He doesn't look like he's 6'4", 250 to me on film, but he's one of those guys that's just a great football player. May not be a dynamo in terms of athleticism, but he gets the job done and he's dependable. He doesn't make mistakes. Great stats last season, 576 and 5 touchdowns. I'll take that all day on a competitive Ohio State team with arguably the best receiver in the game. And I'll mention him, Eric All. That guy is one of kind of the tragedies to me in NCAA football. A guy that probably should be number 1 in this group of tight ends if you just went on pure talent. But the fact that he's been hurt so many years in a row and he just keeps getting hurt. He had the back injury at Michigan, then transfers to Iowa, then tears his ACL at Iowa. He just can't catch a break. And I just don't know if he'll ever be injury free enough to really be a number 1 tight end. Right now, the NFL peeps at NFL.com have him as like the number 4 tight end or 5 tight end, which to me is a little crazy for a guy that's that injury prone. So I wouldn't be able to pull the trigger on him. Round 6 or 7, then maybe I'll take him.
You know what? And talking about guys that are, in that top group that, again, you wonder what they're going to do. You got a guy like Ben Sinnott out of Kansas State, right?
You
got a guy who last year had 48 catches, 669 yards.
I like him.
6 touchdowns, right? 13.9 yards a catch, and is a huge man. And I only say that because you just brought up, 6'4", 254, runs a 4.63.
Yep.
Huge hands. I mean, the guy who's going to do the work, and has a great reputation as a blocker as well. So
I like him a lot. No, I think those are the names to watch. Again, we want to make this a quick hitter for you. That way you can process the info. Keep a look at those names when you're watching the combine on Friday, day 2. That's who's going. That's whose name we're going to be looking at. Josh, as always, thank you, my man.
It's enjoyable. Love talking about the positions that maybe aren't as sexy from time to time, but sure as heck need them to put forth a great team.
100%. People watching at home, like, subscribe. We'll see you next time.